It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion 20525 in the name of Mark Ruskell on a motion on reconsideration of the European Charter of Local Self-Government Incorporation Scotland Bill. I'd be grateful if members who wish to speak in this debate were to press their request to speak buttons, and I call on Mark Ruskell, member in charge, to speak to and move the motion.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm very happy to move this motion to enable the reconsideration of the European Charter of Local Self-Government Incorporation Scotland Bill here this afternoon. Now, some members may be surprised to see me move a second Members' Bill just days after moving my Greyhound Members' Bill through Stage 1. So perhaps a little explanation is required, especially for those members who were not present in Session 5. Now, the Eurocharter Bill, as I call it, was introduced by Andy Whiteman in May 2020, and it passed Stage 3 on the 23rd of March 2021, shortly before dissolution. The bill incorporates the European Charter of Local Self-Government into Scots law, and the fundamental purpose of incorporation is to strengthen the standing of local government in the democratic governance of Scotland through a range of measures relating to the Scottish ministers, the courts and this Parliament. Now, the bill was widely supported on a cross-party basis, and I do want to pay tribute to Andy Whiteman for seeking to elevate the status of local government at a time when concerns about centralisation of decision-making in Edinburgh were rife, and the Verity House Agreement had yet to be signed. In summary, the bill places a duty on the Scottish ministers to act compatibly with the Charter and to promote self-government. The bill requires the courts to give effect to legislation in a way that is compatible with the Charter. It also enables them to declare legislative provisions to be incompatible with the Charter and require the Scottish ministers to take remedial action, as well as giving them powers in relation to decisions of Scottish ministers which breach their duties under the Charter. Finally, bills introduced in this Parliament would need to be accompanied by a statement on their compatibility with the Charter. Now, following Stage 3, this bill, together with the UNCRC bill, was referred to the UK Supreme Court by the Attorney-General and Advocate-General to Scotland under Section 33(1) of the Scotland Act 1998. And in October 2021, the Supreme Court found that the referred provisions were outside the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament. Now, the two bills were drafted differently, and therefore the issues before the Court were slightly different. But the key question on the Eurocharter Bill was whether the bill conferred powers on the courts to interpret and scrutinise the legality of legislation passed by the sovereign UK Parliament, and whether this in effect modified the effect of Section 28(7) of the Scotland Act, which states that the conferral of power on the Scottish Parliament does not affect the power of the UK Parliament to make laws for Scotland. Now, the first provision was Section 4(1)(a) of the Eurocharter Bill, which provided that legislation must be read and given effect in a way which is compatible with the Charter. Now, the Supreme Court ruled that this would sometimes require the courts to modify the meaning and effect of acts of the UK Parliament, producing results which the UK Parliament did not intend. Accordingly, the Court decided that for the same reasons as the similar Section 292A2 of the UNCRC Bill, Section 4(1)(a) of the Eurocharter Bill would be outside of the legislative competence of this Parliament. The second provision was Section 5(1), which would confer on the courts the power to declare that a provision of an Act is incompatible with the Charter. And for the same reasons as the similar Section 21(5)(b)(2) of the UNCRC Bill, the Court decided that Section 5(1) of the Eurocharter Bill would affect the power of the UK Parliament to legislate for Scotland. It would therefore modify Section 28(7) of the Scotland Act and fall outside of the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament. Now, if members are still with me in the chamber, we'll then move to Session 6 of this Parliament, and with Mr Whiteman not being returned as an MSP, the responsibility fell to me, as a designated member now in charge of the bill, to decide whether to move towards a reconsideration. If there's time in hand, I will. To move towards a reconsideration stage. Yeah, I'll take that.
A little. Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful to Mark Ruskell for taking the intervention and indeed explaining the anomaly that we sit in. And there are proposals with regard to how the bill, if the motion is passed this evening, can be rectified. But would he agree with me that in the process that this Parliament takes to look at that, it's not quite the same questions that confronted us with UNCRC and certain careful considerations have to be made about the proposed way of amending this bill, so that when it comes back we don't find ourselves in a horrible roundabout going back to where we were.
Mark Ruskell.
Well, I would agree with the member on that, and clearly there's been a long period of time has elapsed, and I think there has been considerable conversations and consideration from both governments about what would be a legally robust way forward on this. And I point to the Cabinet Secretary's comments later in this debate, but I think we've got enough time to process this bill efficiently towards a reconsideration phase. Now, in May 22, John Swinney gave a statement to Parliament updating next steps on the judgment, and he said that although the Euro Charter Bill was a Members' Bill, the Scottish Government remained committed to supporting it. And my approach since then as a designated member has been to respect the will of this Parliament expressed in Session 5 to allow both the Scottish and UK governments the opportunity to resolve the issues at the heart of the Supreme Court judgment. I have kept the opportunity to fix this bill open during Session 6, and I have liaised with both the Scottish Government and with COSLA throughout. Now, in October 2024, the Scottish Government confirmed that it would lodge and speak to the necessary amendments, given its experience with the UNCRC bill reconsideration stage. Under standing orders, only the member in charge of a bill may propose that Parliament wishes to reconsider a bill following a reference to the UK Supreme Court. I have lodged that motion, which we are considering this afternoon. I urge members to vote for it, to allow amendments to be made, and for the bill hopefully to be approved again, and finally to move towards royal assent. Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank the Cabinet Secretary for engaging with me on this bill. It has taken, as I've already said, a long time to get to this point. I'm aware that there are many bills up for debate at this late stage of this session, but I hope this will be a relatively easy and efficient process to get this bill back over the line to the satisfaction of all concerned and with no further delay. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am pleased to contribute to this debate following the opening remarks from the member in charge of the bill, Mark Ruskell. And can I just pay tribute to the engagement that I've had with him? It's been very constructive. The Scottish Government remains committed to the European Charter of Local Self-Government Bill and to the Charter's principles. And this sits alongside the Verity House Agreement and its explicit commitment by Ministers to support Mark Ruskell to progress this Member's Bill to reconsideration stage as soon as possible. Our offer of practical support has been informed by our experience of the first bill to proceed to reconsideration stage in the Scottish Parliament, and that is, of course, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child (Incorporation) Scotland Bill, which is now the 2024 Act. As Parliament will be aware, the European Charter of Local Self-Government Bill was the second of two bills referred to and found to be out with legislative competence by the Supreme Court. In my letter to Mark Ruskell last month, which has been published by the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee, I confirmed that if Parliament agrees to reconsider the bill, the Scottish Government will lodge and speak to the amendments that we deem necessary, drawing on that experience to support progress through reconsideration. If Parliament agrees to Mr Ruskell's motion, I intend to bring forward amendments as soon as possible that are designed to achieve three things. Firstly, to retain as much of the bill's original purpose and practical effect as possible. Secondly, to frame the applicable duties and remedies clearly within the boundaries of devolved competence to address the findings of the Supreme Court judgment. And thirdly, and crucially, to minimise the possibility of a further Supreme Court referral. My officials have been engaging constructively with UK Government officials over a period of time, sharing proposals in draft and pursuing a cooperative dialogue on the implications of the Supreme Court judgment for the bill's key operative provisions. That engagement and the process of developing amendments has ultimately highlighted once again the challenging practical effect of the restrictions on the Parliament's scope to legislate resulting from Section 28(7) of the Scotland Act 1998. This section states that the power of the Scottish Parliament to make laws for Scotland does not affect the power of the UK Parliament to do so. Discussion of the implications of the Supreme Court judgment continues, and we expect further academic and stakeholder commentary on this matter. And whilst the amendments I intend to lodge would have the effect of limiting the legal impact of the bill to some extent, it should be remembered that the Verity House Agreement, though not legally binding, already commits ministers to act consistently with many of the Charter principles, including subsidiarity and a presumption in favour of local flexibility, using language drawn directly from the Charter. That agreement has already helped realise many of the Charter aspirations, strengthening and framing the relationship between our two spheres of government, setting out how we will work together to better deliver improved outcomes for the people of Scotland. It also committed ministers to ensuring local government has greater flexibility to tailor solutions to meet local needs. By the end of this Parliament, we will have baselined over £2 billion in the General Revenue Grant, jointly published a fiscal framework with COSLA, completed the local governance review, taken forward short-term action to enhance the ability of councils to innovate, meaningfully progressing work towards a power of general competence, introduced new revenue-raising powers and commenced groundwork to support future council tax reform. Reconsideration of this bill is the logical next step to enshrine that existing good practice in law. Crucially, COSLA, as the key local government representative organisation in Scotland, supports the amendments that I propose to take forward, sharing the priority of completing reconsideration within this Parliament and avoiding a further referral. And I want to put on record my thanks to COSLA for all the work that they've done in this area so far. So, Presiding Officer, agreeing the motion to reconsider the bill is the necessary first step to allow Parliament to scrutinise and decide upon my amendments, and I invite members to support Mark Ruskell's motion so that we can deliver a bill before the end of this Parliament that remains faithful to the Charter's purpose, is workable in practice and strengthens local self-government in Scotland.
Thank you. I now call on Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to speak on the motion to allow the Parliament to reconsider the European Charter of Local Self-Government Incorporation Scotland Bill. As the closest level of government the communities are, it is right that councils and elected councillors are given the power to act in the best interest of local residents. The Scottish Conservatives will therefore be supporting the motion so that the Parliament can consider which amendments are needed to bring the bill within legislative competence of this Parliament. However, it is regrettable that the Parliament has had to wait so long for this bill to progress. It's notably been over 1,000 days now since the Supreme Court delivered its judgment back in October 2021. And almost a year ago, the government was indicating that they were working on the bill and it would be reconsidered as soon as practical. So I'm glad that we've got this far now. Yet it is only now that we're getting it to here, and we're only 2 months remaining before the Parliament ceases. So, Presiding Officer, I'd like to reflect on how the political debate around local government has developed since the Parliament debated the bill on stage 3, which is now nearly 5 years ago. COSLA has long supported the principles behind this bill, but they've also indicated that Scotland does face financial situations and circumstances. And in 2023, we saw the Verity House Agreement, which aimed to strengthen the Scottish Government's working relationship with councils. Many of these principles in the agreement can be welcomed, but too much of the agreement yet has to be reality, and councils themselves still feel frustrated at the lack of progress so far. It was never intended that the Verity House Agreement would have any legislative backing, but the principal agreements that are drawn up from the European Charter of Local Self-Government. I therefore hope that we can see genuine progress on the relationship between central and local government, which the Scottish Government has been promising for some number of years. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, this is a very limited time remaining for the current session of the Parliament to reconsider this bill, and I hope that the Government will be able to work alongside Mark Russell in order to ensure that the bill can reach its reconsideration stage. So while it is right for the bill to progress to its reconsideration stage, the Scottish Government still has much work to do to ensure that it reins in the aspects when it comes to local government. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I now call on Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This bill has always had a simple and widely supported purpose to incorporate the European Charter of Local Self-Government into Scots law. In practice, that means giving local authorities clear legal rights, requiring ministers to act in line with the Charter and ensuring Scotland meets the democratic standards expected across Europe. It strengthens local autonomy, improves transparency and allows councils to challenge actions that undermine their role. This was never a constitutional provocation. It was a practical measure to protect and empower local democracy. But the Supreme Court did not strike down that purpose. It struck down the drafting. The then Deputy First Minister promised in May 2022 to work at pace to bring forward amendments. He promised engagement with COSLA and with Parliament. But since that statement, nothing of substance has happened, no amendments, no timetable, and seemingly no progress. COSLA's briefing to its own convention in March 2023 highlighted the lack of apparent progress and urged early ministerial engagement. COSLA seemed to be doing everything it could. The only thing missing was meaningful action from this Scottish Government, and that does seem to be a pattern. Local government has become an afterthought for this administration, not a partner, but the body expected to administer cuts, absorb blame, and take the flak when services are hollowed out. The much lauded Verity House Agreement, once heralded as a new era of respect, lies in complete tatters, abandoned the moment its political usefulness expired. And over the last decade and more, councils have faced cuts of around £7 billion. They're the ones left carrying an unsustainable financial burden, and that's not just the view of me or my Scottish Labour colleagues. SNP councillor Ricky Bell, COSLA spokesperson for resources, warned that local government finances are under severe and growing strain, that councils have already delivered significant savings year on year, and there is a clear limit to what can be achieved without impacting the services communities rely on. He said reliance on reserves and borrowing is not a sustainable long-term solution, and that the medium-term outlook shows continued deprioritisation and the prospect of significant real-term cuts. SNP councillors' conclusion is that urgent action is needed. Now, Presiding Officer, this bill was universally supported. Passing it promptly should have been the easy part, yet the government has managed to turn that consensus from years ago into delay 6 years of it. Local government deserves better, Scotland deserves better, and today at long last we have the chance to put that right without excuses, without constitutional theatre, and with the respect our councils and communities are owed. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I now call on Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrats in support of the motion before us this afternoon. I was one of the original signatories to the initial bill in the name of Andy Whiteman during the last session of the Scottish Parliament. At its heart, the bill is about a simple idea that the power to make decisions which affect communities should always sit as close as humanly possible to the people it serves. Too often, under successive SNP administrations, power in Scotland has gone the other way. It's become too centralised. And our local councils have been treated less like a democratic partner and more like a delivery arm for the government. We've heard a lot about the Verity House Agreement, but we know that the Verity House Agreement has at several times had a coach and horses driven through it. So I welcome this today, and I welcome the signal from the Cabinet Secretary of the government support. The Parliament passed this bill back in 2021 with strong cross-party backing. We've already heard that. And since then, we've had the Supreme Court judgment, which was clear that certain provisions, particularly sections 4 and 5, went beyond the limits of this Parliament's power in how they interacted with UK legislation. This reconsideration stage gives us a chance to finally respond to that judgment responsibly, but without losing sight of what the bill is trying to achieve. The amendments before us today do just that. They are focused, they are proportionate, and they closely follow the approach this Parliament has already taken with its reconsideration of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child Bill. And while it is regrettable that by necessity they do narrow the scope of the legislation somewhat, it is still a big improvement on not having the legislation enacted at all, and clearly we cannot proceed with another bill that may not be competent. I also want to acknowledge the decision to amend Section 2 of the bill. I understand the reluctance to narrow its scope, and I share the frustration that this creates, particularly amongst our council colleagues, but I also think it right to be honest about the risk to further legal challenge. Another referral to the Supreme Court would help no one, least of all local government, which has already waited long enough for this legislation to move forward. What's important is this bill still marks a significant step forward. It embeds the principles of European Charter into Scots law and strengthens the culture of respect and partnership and mutual trust between national and local government. Agreements like the Verity House agreement already point us in that direction, but as we've seen over the last few years, at the moment the government can run roughshod over those principles. Presiding Officer, this motion is not about reopening old arguments, it's about finishing the job properly within our powers and sending a clear signal that this Parliament believes in strong, empowered local government. For those reasons, we will, of course, support it today.
Thank you, and I call on Mark Ruskell, the member in charge, to wind up the debate.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I thank members for their contributions? Can I also thank COSLA as well, who've been absolutely relentless, particularly their political leadership over the last 4 years in driving towards the line, trying to get this bill back over the line. It's been great to work with them. Can also thank Ros Thompson from Non-Government Bills Unit as well, who's really kept this bill on life support over the last 5 years. Before returning to Holyrood in 2016, I spent 5 years as a councillor in Stirling, and it really left a mark on me. The importance of that strong, accountable, empowered local government, absolutely critical. It's the level of government that works closest to the people. And, comments have been made about the Verity House agreement. I mean, I don't see that as an end point. I think it's a start. It has helped to reset the relationship, but, I do agree with that, Cole Hamilton and Alexander Stewart, that, there's a long way to go. And I think, what this bill does is it gives us an opportunity to embed the principles further into the work of both the Scottish Government and also the Parliament in the next session. I also note that the Verity House agreement actually committed the government to embed the Euro Charter into law. This is what local government wants. It's normal across Europe, and I think if we can get these amendments through and over the line, that's exactly what it will do. If I can just make some brief comments then about the amendments that the government will be proposing. Sections 4 and 5 on interpretation declarations of incompatibility will be amended to restrict their application to acts of the Scottish Parliament and also Scottish statutory instruments. The government amendments, as the Cabinet Secretary outlined, though, will go further than these two sections of the Euro Charter Bill considered by the UK Supreme Court, and they will include amendments to the duty on Scottish ministers to act compatibly with the Charter under Section 2 of the Bill. Now, we've heard that this is on the basis that the Scottish Government, through engagement with the UK Government, have not been able to rule out the possibility of a further referral if Section 2 is not amended during reconsideration stage. I think that's regrettable. I would ask Mark Griffin to reflect on the fact that this has been a conversation between two governments, Labour government and an SNP government, and I would have preferred those amendments on Section 2 to not be drafted. But we are where we are, and that amendment will reduce the reach and effect of this bill because much of the legislation in devolved areas such as education is still contained within the UK legislation. However, my priority as a designated member is in seeing this bill pass the reconsideration stage and to avoid any further referral to the UK Supreme Court. And COSLA are content with this approach. It is disappointing it's taken so long to get clarity on this point in the UK Government, but I think on balance it's a lot better to have a bill move to royal assent than to be struck down again, have an uncertain future dragging into Session 7 of this Parliament. So, Presiding Officer, I'll just end with the words of Andy Whiteman, who in the Stage 3 debate 5 years ago said, "We're strengthening our democracy. In particular, we're strengthening the institution of our system of government that lies closest to the people so that it might serve them better and more effectively and be more responsive to the wishes of local communities rather than the political imperatives in Edinburgh." Now, I agreed with those words then, I agree with them now, and I urge members to back the motion for reconsideration of the Euro Charter Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. That concludes the debate on a motion on reconsideration of the European Charter of Local Self-Government Incorporation Scotland Bill.